Sarah, it's such a privilege for us to have you here in Oxford.
It's a privilege to be here.
And I was going to start by doing a sort of potted biography, but I thought, no, let's hear from Sarah, let's hear your story. So tell us about it, tell us about you and how you became a speechwriter at the White House.
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Talking to an audience like this is amazing. I listened to the speeches last night at dinner. You all are brilliant. I mean, it is, as an American, to be around Europeans who are like, oh, I apologize, English is only my 7th language, I'm sorry. It's like, my God, you all are. It's very impressive to me. And I appreciate you not reading my bio because it makes me very uncomfortable when people do that, because it implies that being a speechwriter is about having some linear series of very orderly jobs and it all works out, and that's just not true at all. You know, I got my start in speechwriting. I was an intern for Vice President Al Gore during the Clinton administration. His speechwriters helped me get my first job out of college, which was in state government. I was commuting 3 hours a day round trip. I sat in a windowless cubicle next to the bathroom. I was miserable. I quit after 9 months. I then got a job for a United States Senator from Iowa, lovely Midwestern state, and I didn't know how to write speeches. It was a disaster. He hated my writing, and after 9 months, they said, you should really go to law school. You would be better as a lawyer. So, so I did, went to law school, didn't really love it, but my 3rd week of law school, I met a guy who had been a speechwriter for President Clinton. He was a classmate of mine, and the two of us started freelancing together, and he really taught me how you structure a speech, how you write to be heard rather than to be read, 2 very different skills. And the two of us got a job on a campaign of a man named General Wesley Clark, who was running in 2003 for president. He lost. We then got jobs on Senator John Kerry's campaign, and he lost. And then in 2008, I got a job as Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter, and she lost. So at this point, I don't think anyone was looking at my resume and like, well, this one's going straight to the top. Not that impressive, but I got very lucky in that after Hillary conceded, I got a call from John Favreau, and who was then Senator Obama's chief speechwriter. And he said, look, I'm sorry about Hillary, but would you come work for me for Senator Obama? And I said, yes, I would, obviously. And then Obama won, which was like, wow, I didn't know what to do with myself. It was like, wow, she won an election. But on that campaign, I had met Mrs. Obama because I helped her with her convention speech in 2008. And then when we went to the White House, I wrote for him for a couple of years, and he's wonderful. I loved him, but I was just more comfortable in her voice, right? It was just a more natural fit, and I would help her with things here and there the first couple of years. And I just realized I want to work for her full time. So I moved over from writing for President Obama to First Lady Obama, which is a very unusual move in White House career trajectories, but it was the right move for me, and the rest is history.
You've described her as your speechwriting soulmate. And I'm fascinated, and I'm sure everyone else is, in sort of how the process works, you know, the drafting process. How did you sit down together and thrash out these speeches? So can you talk us through how you actually work together?
Yeah, you know, Michelle Obama knows who she is, and she just always knows what she wants to say, right? So any process with her involves sitting down with her and saying, what do you want to say, right? That's how I would start every meeting. And she would just dictate paragraphs and paragraphs of vivid, beautiful, memorable language, which was just, you know, I would take my laptop and type as quickly as possible. I really tried to make a transcript of what she was saying. She's just a natural speaker, and she would just sort of like download this, and then I would go and I would shape it into a draft, right? I would structure it. I would incorporate research I had done. You know, if she's speaking at a university, I would have studied the history of the university. I would have spoken with students and faculty, so I would maybe weave in some stories. And then I would send it around to my colleagues and, you know, the press office, the lawyers, the policy people. Everyone in the White House has a stake in speeches, and they would send back edits, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with that process. And in the Obama White House, speechwriters were very empowered. So if I thought an edit was not good, I could push back, right? I could say, okay, I get it. There's an issue here, but I don't like the way you've suggested to fix it. How about this? And we would sort of negotiate. And then I would give it to her, and then we would go back and forth. She would edit it, I would edit her edits, she would edit my edits. I mean, it was like, you know, often a very extensive back and forth with just pages of speeches marked up in her handwriting, and then she would deliver it.
And what about your writing environment? So you've gone from this windowless cubicle, and now you're in the White House. Were you sort of in an office on your own? Was it an open plan situation? Did you go off with a laptop and get some peace and quiet? So how did you sit down and write those speeches?
So we basically had a suite of offices for the Speechwriters, and Steve Crouppen, one of my colleagues, he was 2 doors down from me. So there was just a row of little individual offices and a shared hallway. And we were always in and out of each other's offices. And it was both the president and first lady's speechwriters in the same place. So while we didn't write the same speech together, it was one speech, one writer, we did collaborate a lot. If we got writer's block, we would sort of talk it through with each other. We were a really collegial, tight group. Like they're still like my family.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And obviously you wrote some phenomenal speeches for Mrs. Obama over the years, Democratic National Convention 2008, 2012, 2016. These are all speeches we know. We've all studied them. We've loved them. Which is the speech that you're most proud of, do you think? And what makes a good speech?
So, I think probably the 2016 convention speech is the one I'm most proud of. Although when they go low, we go high was her line. That was not my line. She just said it and I typed it into the speech. But I think also, that was just a speech that had a big impact. I think it moved a lot of people. But there are also speeches I love that I think are much less well known. I mean, one of my favorites is a speech that she gave to a high school for Native American students out in New Mexico. I'm sure no one knows the speech. But, it was a really amazing school that had a really painful history, where it was one of the schools that the U.S. federal government used to run to strip Native American children of their cultures and their languages, which is horrific. And this school had actually been taken back over by tribal leaders, and now it was this amazing school that empowered them to learn about their languages and their cultures. And, she just gave this very personal, emotional speech to them, and they didn't believe she would come. They actually thought, when students suggested inviting her, a lot of the other students said, that's so stupid. Mrs. Obama is never gonna come to a school like ours. And so when she came, it was sending a very powerful message to them that actually, no, you all are absolutely worthy of having a president or first lady visit you. It was just a very moving experience.
Would you accompany her on the visits and
Yeah.
hear your speeches be delivered? Is that
I
important
would.
to you?
Yeah, it is actually. It's important to me because you can lose touch with your boss and how the person is being received if you're not constantly in the flow and kind of watching them. And that was a fun part of the job. I really enjoyed that.
And that sort of brings on to the next question, which is about authenticity, and that's a word we've heard a lot over these last few days.
Yeah.
Mrs. Obama, President Obama, very well known for their authenticity. It's one of their strengths. I guess the question is, how do we as speechwriters, in a very sort of quite inauthentic, quite contrived role, strive for that authenticity? What is authenticity?
I know, it's very tough. And I think it depends so much on the relationship you have with your boss. Some speakers are terrible. They're just terrible bosses, right? They don't get speech writing. They don't want to invest the time. It's like, oh, just give me something to react to. I don't know what I want to say. It's like, that is impossible. That's an impossible arrangement. And whenever I speak to conferences of speechwriters, it just breaks my heart when they ask questions like, okay, my boss will never talk to me, so what do I do? It's like, oh gosh. Or like that's very tough. I mean, I think, capturing that authenticity is about having a boss, and I was very lucky, who will sit down and take the time to tell you, look, here's what I'm really thinking. Here is what is in my heart. I think Mrs. Obama, she sort of approached every speech by asking herself, what is the deepest, most important truth I can tell at this particular moment? That is just, if you start with that, I think that is the most important way to start, because oftentimes people start with, okay, what does the audience want to hear? And what will make me sound smart or funny or powerful or whatever? Very important question. That's your second question, right? Your first question is, what is the truth I want to tell here? And look, you may not be able to tell that truth, right? It may not be appropriate. You may have to kind of carefully manage it for the audience, but you have to be very, very clear about what it is that is really true at this moment. And then you think, okay, how am I gonna tell this in a way that the audience can receive it? Or, you know what? This audience is not going to receive this. I actually can't tell this. Okay, fine. But I think it's important to start with that kind of truth. And I think if you look at Barack Obama's 2004 convention speech, he started that speech by saying, let's face it, my presence on this stage tonight is pretty unlikely. He's basically saying, I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, how is a black guy named Barack Hussein Obama the lead speaker in a major party convention? he named what so many people were thinking, and you gain instant credibility. He spoke a truth. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but people said, okay, all right. He said what I was thinking. Okay, fair enough. And just to start that way, I think is very powerful.
Do you know how that one came about?
I have no idea. Yeah. It was way before my time.
Might have been from him, might have been from a speechwriter, might have been
probably from him.
Absolutely.
It's quite amazing.
You've said in the past on this subject that so many people get frustrated by fake, polished, careful, measured politician talk. That when someone gets up and speaks impulsively, it's brazen and visceral, and it's authentic. So obviously that's done effectively when you're Mrs. Obama, President Obama, but it's also done quite effectively by populist leaders who we're facing today. What's your sort of view on that phenomenon, the way that oratory is going, the way we're seeing authenticity being used in a very powerful way?
Yeah. So I'm actually not a big fan of people speaking off the cuff. I actually think the sort of myth of like, oh, stand up and then throw the speech aside and just say what's on your heart. I think that goes badly about 99% of the time. I think it's very rarely impressive, and I think it's kind of lazy and disrespectful to the audience, to be totally blunt. I also don't find it to be particularly authentic. I mean, if you think about it, the paper that you spent 2 weeks writing when you were in school and you agonized over every line and you made it so perfect, is that less authentic than the speech that you dashed off an hour before the deadline? I don't think so. Right? I think it's actually more authentic because you've really made sure it's what you wanted to say. But the thing is, we're seeing a moment where that is very effective, right? Where it's like this kind of off the cuff, unscripted. And I think what that is a reaction to is over-scripting, right? I think that for many years, at least in the US, politicians went way too far to be scripted, right? And they weren't, it was these like stupid sound bites. The middle class is the middle of my priorities. What? Like, just like, it's like ridiculous. We need to put hardworking American middle-class family values first. Like, no one has ever turned to their friend, their spouse, their partner, and been like, honey, I'm just thinking we need to put hardworking American middle-class family values first, right? Like, if you would not say something to one person, you shouldn't say it to many people. It doesn't get better. And I think a lot of Americans got sick of it, right? They just got sick of it. They felt like it was fake. And so when someone like Trump comes along, who is just, nothing is hidden about him, right? There's no secret Donald Trump that we don't know about, right? It's all just blurted out there. And it feels very authentic. There's a difference between authenticity and honesty, though. Let's just be very clear. He is not honest, but he's very authentic. And I think people are reacting to that, but I don't think that authenticity and scriptedness are two different things, right? I think the Obamas were very authentic because they riffed a lot, they talked off the cuff a lot, but they did it before they stepped up to the podium, right? They had enough respect to their audience to take the time before they went to the podium to really say, okay, what do I authentically want to say? I want to get this all out, I'm going to brainstorm it, I'm going to download it, we're going to arrange it into a draft, we're really going to take the time to put my thoughts on the page before I step up. So by the time they stepped up, it was their authentic speaking, whereas you see some speakers who are like, I don't know, they step up, they kind of go here and there, and I don't know, is that authentic? I just think it's kind of lazy.
On the subject of Trump,
yes.
In her book, Mrs. Obama writes about the speech you wrote together following his locker room comments, I think he called them, pretty vile language that he'd used in the past. She says in her book that she channeled her fury into words, and you're the person who helped her do that. How do you do that? How, when someone goes so low as he did, how did you make her go high?
I mean, she really, I didn't make her do anything on that speech. She knew, she had such a strong sense of what she wanted to say there. And she was just, I just remember the meeting with her where she was like, here is what we are doing. And she just really downloaded that speech to me. And I think, it is very tempting when you are feeling hurt and kind of oppressed and violated by someone, as I think a lot of people, especially women, feel when they hear the way that Trump talks. It's threatening, it's bullying, it's a huge violation of your feeling of safety. I think the impulse is to lash out at them, right? You're a monster, you're an animal, you're this, and like, it's actually not that helpful. It's understandable, but not helpful. And I think what she did, instead of making it about him and how awful he was, she just kind of, it's interesting, she never uttered his name, ever, not once. He already gets a lot of attention. She didn't give him more. She really went to like, how does this make us feel? As women, as men, as a society, like let's really articulate the pain and the suffering and the violence that this is doing to us and to our children. Let me articulate that. Let me explain how wrong that is, how the damage that it's doing to us, and let me articulate a vision for what we should be doing. And I think she just did that in such a visceral, powerful, authentic way, and just the response we got to that speech was extraordinary. I mean, we got so many emails and letters after that speech where women were writing to her and saying, for the first time in my life, I don't feel ashamed about what happened to me. I'm no longer going to be ashamed because you spoke so powerfully. We had a lot of men who wrote to us and saying, thank God, like, I don't talk like this. My sons don't talk like this. My friends don't talk like this. This isn't normal male behavior. Like, that's nonsense. Thank you for saying that. So I think that, she didn't make it. I think when you go low, you have an instinct to kind of tear down the other person. I think going high is very much about articulating your totally different view. I think, look at the 2016 convention speech. You didn't see his name in there, but, when she talks about how, the issues that the president deals with are complicated and can't be articulated in 140 characters, just it's a thing. I think we're, she's sort of, it's like talking in the positive, drawing a very positive vision that is the complete opposite of a very negative vision. It's its own kind of way of pushing back against that negative vision.
So when you had these conversations about, his remarks, did you kind of get your fury out of the way? You and Mrs. Obama sat down and went, and then let's sit down and chat.
Yeah, I think that the way when you're meeting with your boss, it's like it's off the record, right? You're just kind of saying honestly what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and you both know you're not going to go then just type that up and say it, right? It's a way you sort of get out the truth, and then you do step 2, right? Which is okay, how am I going to get the audience to receive this? How am I going to translate this truth into language that they understand and that really persuades and changes people's mind?
Wonderful, and it was an amazing speech.
Thank you.
Her book, Becoming, I think has sold 10 million copies, and it's on course to be the biggest selling memoir of all time.
That's amazing.
Something like that, and obviously you're mentioned in it and your speeches are quoted throughout, which is incredible. But it's not the only show in town. There's another book coming out at the end of this year, I think, and it's a book that you're writing right at this moment. You're doing the copy edits right now.
I am.
So tell us about your book, and tell us about what it's like writing for the eye rather than writing for the ear, as you have done for so many years.
So I don't think my book is going to sell as many copies as her book. I think that's, we'll see. But it's funny. When I run into colleagues from the White House now, they'll say, "Oh, what are you up to?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm writing a book." And they're like, "Oh, great! Political memoir about speech writing." I'm like, "No, it's a book about Judaism." And they're like, "Oh, wow, that's weird." But it's I'm Jewish, and I grew up without not a lot of Jewish education or practice. And about 5 years ago, I just started learning about Judaism on my own. I was just so moved by what I found. This is such an ancient tradition with such deep insight and wisdom for modern times. I just found it to be really edgy and radical and interesting and moving and inspiring. Yet it's really, a lot of the books out there about Judaism, some of them are very academic, some of them are very basic. It's a hard tradition to write about because it's not meant to be sort of taught, it's meant to be lived, it's meant to be immersed in. And so I just thought, gosh, I would really like to write the book that I had when I first started learning. Something that kind of explains the basics, but also articulates some of the deeper wisdom and truths about Judaism. So I've been writing that for the last 2 years, and it is, I've discovered I don't know grammar or punctuation. I've just lost that.
Do you ever sort of lapse into speak?
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm so, I don't, it's like, I have a very informal kind of writing style, and I think, I'm looking at these edits from the copy editor who's like, there was a dangling participle here. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I literally don't know what that means. So I'm like rewriting the sentence. I'm like, hopefully that handles that participle issue. It's a little bit confusing, but right, it is a very different, things that sound natural coming out of our mouths look very weird on the page, right? It's just and what did I just say? I said, right, question mark. It's just right. Nobody was like, I'm sorry, that was a sentence fragment. No, right? This is how we talk, but it is not how we write. So that transition, and writing in my own voice as opposed to Michelle Obama's voice, that's a transition too, right? It's for so many years I was thinking, okay, how would she think? How would she feel? And to kind of think oh, what do I think and feel? It's a little bit of a transition.
Well, we can't wait to read it.
Oh,
it's going to be
thank
fantastic.
You. It's on Amazon now. Here All Along is the title. You can order it. I'm just saying, if anyone wants to.
Everyone get on it.
great question. I cannot think of a single time that they were, I mean, who knows, right? I'm not obviously with them in their private lives, but I can't think of a single time where they were in disagreement with each other. I mean, I will say they do have very different voices. So at one point, after a couple of years of writing for him, there was like 6 months where I was writing for both of them, and that was a nightmare. I just found that very difficult because her voice is much more personal, much more emotional. She is not the commander-in-chief, right? So like, she is not the first responder when something happens. She is not standing up and articulating administration policy, right? It's just a different role, whereas he has a commander-in-chief voice. It's just very different. And so that, to me, going back and forth was quite hard. That is one thing where it's different roles, right? And their personalities are very different as well.
Was it ever a consideration when doing something for Michelle that it might not tally with what we're saying? Or is that
Yeah, I mean, there was, I had to be aware of what he was saying on issues at all times, and, she would be often echoing the administration's messages, but, a lot of times she was speaking on issues that he wasn't, right? She spoke a lot about childhood obesity, about international girls' education, and in the times when he spoke about them, his writers would come to me and say, like, okay, what's she been saying? We would sort of keep up with each other on the issues that were most important to each person. Yeah, that's the main way we did it.
Were you mostly or rarely almost completely satisfied with the piece when it was just about to be delivered? Or did you almost always have regrets once it was, once it was sent out, the ship went out, where you like, I could have done this, I could have done that. I think we all suffer from it, but I wonder.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was mostly satisfied. You're never completely, like, it's never perfect, right? But I think most of the time I felt like, she wouldn't give a speech she wasn't happy with, period. She does not do that, right? She's going to work on it until it's something she feels really good about. And as far as I'm concerned, if she feels good, then I feel good. Right, like I'm here to serve her. I might, as you all experience, there are times where I never disagreed with her on policy or substance. I don't write for people with whom I disagree. But there were times when she wanted to say something in a way that I just thought was not as powerful or could have been better. And she was almost always right. She would say, no, Sarah, you're wrong about this. Here's how I want to say it. And I'm like, okay, it's your speech. And then when she would actually say it, I'd think, yep, she was right. That was better than what I wanted to do. So she was kind of the best judge of that stuff. So if she was happy, I was happy.
I think Paul's got one.
Hi Sarah, thanks for joining us today. Jess mentioned about the fact that Michelle Obama's book was the biggest selling autobiography of all time. I just wanted to get your thoughts on why you think that is.
I really think it is because it is so honest. I just think it's bracing when someone is just so honest. Like, it's a lot of memoirs and autobiographies are like, here's when I was awesome, and this other time I was awesome, and also I was very successful here, and look at how impressive I was here. It's like, really? Or they give a little bit of authenticity, just as a little token. And do you really want to? I don't want to read that. That's like the Facebook. It's like, oh, look at the fabulous life I lead. It's so boring, right? And and a lot of people who write political memoirs, remember, they're, if they're younger, they're planning to run for office later. So they're scrubbing every line, every word, thinking, how will this look for my campaign later? She's never running. She's not kidding when she says she's not running. She is not running, period. So that memoir wasn't scrubbed, right? It was this is who I am, this is what I believe, here is my life in all of its messy detail. And it wasn't salacious, right? It wasn't sort of really kind of gross. It was just very honest, and I think it's unusual, and it's bracing when someone does that.
Her work ethic is amazing. Like, the stories, when she was in her sort of 20s and stuff and 30s, and she had the kids, and she was getting up at like 4 a.m. to go to the gym, and just her life was just an incredible story, but also her determination. And you must have seen that every day at work.
Those are the perfect words to describe it. Work ethic and determination. Like, she's just so disciplined. She's so hardworking, and it is such a blessing to work for someone who is so disciplined, because she doesn't do the like, it's the morning of the speech, I've changed my mind, I'm blowing it up, we're starting over. Like, I hate that. I mean, you've all done that. We've all experienced it. It is miserable. And the sort of myth that like, oh, you blow up the speech the morning of, and then you write the great address. No, you don't. No, you don't. That doesn't happen. And so I really, with her, she like thought things through in advance. We met in advance. The speech was done in advance. And sure, there might be a few last minute edits. if there was some unfortunate, some sort of crisis the morning of, we would obviously add a topper at the beginning to acknowledge it, stuff like that. But her discipline made for a very orderly process, which I think made for good speeches.
You mentioned the corridor where you and your fellow speechwriters worked.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights that gives you any sense of what that corridor might be like today?
It's funny. I know I've had interactions with writers from the Bush administration who I think are wonderful. I mean, I love, if you look at David Frum, Michael Gerson, Pete Wehner, these guys are phenomenal writers, and they're doing some of the smartest writing, I think, about the Trump administrations. And I'm just we disagree on policy issues, but they feel to me like kindred spirits, right? Like our thoughts about basic human decency, about democracy, about the importance of a free press and an independent judiciary, we are identical, right? On the core approach to democracy. I just think the Trump world is something very different, so I really don't have any connections or insights into that world.
Are there speechwriters there?
I think, I don't know. I think, there's Stephen Miller, who is also an advisor. I think he writes some speeches. There may be other writers, but I have no window in there.
Because his State of the Union, the most recent one, it was like an attempt at being quite normal, and it was trying to be a proper speech, but even he couldn't manage that.
Yeah, it happens sometimes, but it's, yeah.
What was the atmosphere like in those last few days, before you had to move out of the White House?
It was hard, right? It was shocking, right? We all thought Hillary was going to win, so I think there was a real sense of shock. But I will tell you, the Obamas were so strong and just so stalwart, and they said you can be as upset as you want to be. Everyone's entitled to feel how they want to feel, but we are going to do a perfect transition. So the Bushes did a perfect transition for us. They were gracious, they were kind, they prepared thorough briefings. I mean, the Bushes they were so classy. Mrs. Bush's staffers, they all wrote notes to Mrs. Obama's staffers, right? The Bush people all briefed the Obama people so thoroughly and so well. It was just this classy, perfect transition, and the Obamas said, we are going to do the same thing for the Trumps. And I don't want to hear, you will do this perfectly. You will leave your offices in perfect order. You will give them orderly briefings. You will do everything that you can to ensure that they succeed.
And set the tone for everyone else,
they set the tone for us, and it really, in the days after the election, it was really moving and inspiring to see them take that approach. And I'm grateful to have worked for them.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Did you ever work with and you must have had to work with the Biden team. And they had Joe Biden has such a different style. What was that
Very.
like?
So his speech, he had his own speechwriters, and he has a very different approach, right? He is, scripting him doesn't really happen. So
you don't get the sense that he has the same discipline.
It's a different approach. Yeah, I mean, his speechwriters look very tired. But his style, I think it can be very moving for folks. Like, he's a very genuine, authentic guy, and just such an incredible public servant. This is a guy who has spent his entire life. He's never made money. I mean, he's literally, he is a true public servant, which I just am so inspired by. And his wife, Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden, she is extraordinary. I mean, I know her much better than him, because she would not often, but sometimes she and Mrs. Obama worked on military family issues together, so we would sometimes travel with her. She's the most down-to-earth, lovely woman. She's a community college professor, and she loves teaching community college because it's a lot of women who come back to school later in life, right? It's a lot of people who are working their way through school, and she just loves empowering these folks to kind of build a better life for themselves and their kids, and she's just a lovely person. They're a beautiful family. I really, getting to know her especially, and a little bit him, was one of the joys of being in the White House.
Let's end it there. Let's end it on loveliness.
Yes.
Lovely family, positive messages. Let's savour that. And I think I'm going to have to hand over to Guy now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.